Hello and welcome to another episode of the Interwoven podcast, the voice of the North Essex startup community. I'm your host Adam Roxby, the Director of Communications here at The Weave, and we've got a great episode for you today. We have one of our community members, Temini, who you may remember from a previous episode, and she's talking to Natalie Faye. Natalie is one of those people who's done so much it would be hard to cover in this brief introduction. She's a TV presenter, author, singer and environmental campaigner. In this conversation, in which James was also listening, Temini talks to Natalie about her books, her music and her many years working against plastic pollution. So I know you're going to enjoy this. So let's get started with the conversation between Temini and Natalie.
Hi everyone, and hi Natalie again. I know that you've won the Sheila McKenney Award for Environmental Justice with City to Sea's Switch the Stick campaign, which was super impressive. You got 9 major retailers to switch plastic stems to paper in cotton buds. I watched the video on your website, and the tone, the messaging, the visuals is very simple, straightforward, and it was perfect, really. So as someone who's so passionate about environmentalism, could you tell us a bit about your switch moment and what it was like becoming an environmentalist when it wasn't trending?
Thank you. Switch the Stick was a really exciting campaign and definitely gave me a sense of how, as individuals even, we have agency and we have power to change the world. And obviously I didn't do it on my own. We had hundreds of thousands of signatures and I had people working with me at that point. So it was very much a team effort. But I guess my wake-up call to plastic was probably about 13 years ago when I saw a trailer for a film. At the time it was called Midway, but it then became called Albatross. And I became aware of the problem of plastic pollution, most particularly how it was affecting wildlife more than it was the oceans at the time. I was particularly concerned about how it was affecting wildlife and seeing everyday items of plastic that I was using ending up inside the bellies of these incredible, beautiful seabirds, the majestic albatross, dying in their nest with their bellies full of plastic. And so that was really for me this can't be happening and I must be able to do something about it. And so that's how, that was the sort of seed for setting up City to Sea, really, although it did actually start with a song, which I think we might talk about later. So it became a social enterprise, a community interest company and a charity over the last 10 years. But I think in terms of the wider wake-up call to what's going on with the planet, I've always been very interested and connected to nature, and I've always felt like nature is an extension of myself, really. I've always been interested in hanging out in the woods and amongst the flowers and the tree stumps and so I think late teens, early 20s, I got into a corporate lifestyle very quickly, was earning a lot of money very quickly. And I was kind of like, hang on, this doesn't feel in balance. And I went to South America, and there I had a first-hand experience of the impact of mining on indigenous communities and deforestation. So I think probably that was my switch moment, but there've maybe been quite a few over the years.
So I like that you mentioned the intersection of everything else that goes on with environmentalism, because there's so much more than just plastic overuse. It's politics. It's I think you had a really nice phrase on our capacity for cruelty and kindness at the same time in your book. It was really great how your central focus is on facts and figures, but you always deliver that in a very bite-sized and relatable way. So I'm really interested on the process of how you wrote that book and how it came about. I know there's some poetic influence there as well. Could you tell us more about the process of writing that book?
Sure. So, that came out in 2019, and I think that's sort of probably my most successful book, baby. I had a book out previously to that on well-being and happiness, and then How to Save the World for Free came out. And more recently, I wrote Do Good, Get Paid, which was around sort of how to earn a living doing good in the world. But with how to save the world for free. So I'd been working on plastic pollution for a number of years. And then in 2018, there were two things that happened that year. The IPCC report came out, threatening sort of imminent collapse within 12 years if we didn't do something about climate change. And the WWF report came out saying that just in the last 40 years, we'd lost half the world's wildlife. So this is going back to 2018. I turned 40 in 2018. And so that stat for me was just so, it was like a lightning bolt. It was like, oh my God, in my lifetime, here I stand, age 40, and here's this report saying in the last 40 years, so since I've been on this planet, we've lost half the world's wildlife. And that statistic just completely floored me, like in the same way that I had that catalyst moment when I saw the albatross chicks dying. For me, this statistic was so meaningful to me and so pertinent in my 40th year that I felt like I had to do something about that. And so I thought, how can I take this big sort of wave of interest, really a surge of interest in plastics that was happening around that time with the Blue Planet effect and the David Attenborough series around plastic? How could I take that and broaden it out and look at all the things that are going kind of wrong in terms of our environment and break that down into an accessible, weirdly light-hearted read? I mean, the first, as you'll have seen or heard, the first fifth of the book isn't light-hearted because we look at everything that's going wrong in the world and I don't shy away from it, but we then move into, well, what can we do as individuals and where do we have influence and how can we do it without it costing us lots of money, and then how can we amplify our impact? So that was the inspiration for writing the book. And I've had some lovely feedback. I think it's become a nice sort of tool book.
It's a really great book. I will go back to it. So did you experience any burnout? How did you juggle running your campaigns and writing this book at the same time? Because I know that for the Weave, it's a hot topic, like burnout is a hot topic because there's a lot of pressure with modern day entrepreneurship and several founders are experiencing this too.
Sure. Really important topic. And I'm really glad that you've brought it today, because I think I experienced my first burnout in 2017 and that we'd only been going for like 2 years, but it was so intense. And obviously you're really hand to mouth in those first few years. You don't know if it's going to work and you're, hugely passionate about your cause. And I remember feeling like the most tired I've ever felt, I think, and I'm even talking about like even more tired than pregnancy, which is really, really, really and like a depression that it was just, my mental health was really affected. And I remember just having to take that's right, I was doing my TED talk around the time, and moving house and a relationship breakup, and I think those three or four things plus the business was just too many factors. So I took about a month off and just had to lean into the 2-3 members of staff that we had, and they, we were only really at that point paid like 2 days a week each or something. So I just had to ease off. It was a wake-up call, and it did make me realize, okay, we have to factor this in to being a sustainable organization and to being sustainable as healthy human beings. We're kind of, in a way, we're by kind of going through doing burnout and working in the ways that we are, we're kind of doing the opposite to what nature is showing us. Nature has its winter. Nature doesn't do growth at all costs. And I think, we're kind of playing into those sort of capitalist influences that make us work more, work harder at all costs, really. So it was around that time, maybe 2018, 2019, we started exploring the 4-day week. And I think it was 2019 that we implemented the 4-day week, but we still paid people for a 5-day week. So that sort of, we thought, well, as campaigners, we need a bit of mental health space. And if you're trying to live with less plastic, you do need a bit of extra time to maybe go to different shops to do bulk batch cooking. So we decided to do that. It's not been without its problems, and I think the last few years since COVID, funding's been particularly difficult for us. We've had to resize, we've had to reduce our headcount, which has been very difficult. But in 2025, that will be our 10th year, which I think is, hugely, well, it's amazing. I never kind of had a plan that we'd become a successful campaigning organisation. And so the fact that we're still here 10 years later is great. But circling back to burnout, I found now I have a daily nature practice. So I go and sit under a tree every single morning. I've been doing that now for a couple of years, but more dedicatedly, sort of, I'm about 3 weeks away from having done it every day for a year. And the change in my mental health and the change in my anxiety levels, fitness levels, happiness levels has been really extraordinary. And so I think for any entrepreneur, I think anyone working behind a desk, because it comes with its own stresses, even just being stagnant and sitting all day is kind of, not good for our mental health either. So just if you can, incorporating some nature time every day, and obviously dog walkers are kind of have this a bit easier because they need to go out a few times a day. But I think there's also something different if you can, going on your own, sitting in silence and being with nature, and taking your questions, your struggles, those sort of things, and being with nature in silence, I think is a really great way to, I'd say even avoid burnout or address it when it's happening.
But yes, thank you so much. I feel like pushing that lifestyle on just, slowing down a bit, not having 5 working days, it's so much better for our mental health in general. And time in nature really just centers you in a way that I can't put into words. So I know you spoke about how things were going in 2017, but I did have some questions about your plastic-free period campaign in 2017, only because I wasn't aware of plastics in period products in 2017. I went down that rabbit hole in 2019, and I can't cite a lot of information before 2018. So how did you piece that puzzle together, and what led you to include period campaigns as part of City to Seas initiatives?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, how there was very little awareness about the hidden plastic in period products pre-2018, really. And I think we were slightly ahead of the curve, and it was because of our Switch the Stick campaign. So we'd been, picking up cotton buds on riverbanks and beaches, and understanding that these come through the sewage spills. So when combined sewer overflows spill, and we know that sewage and is released into our rivers and seas when there's been heavy flooding or when there's been heavy rain, and particularly if the sewers are blocked. So I ended up spending way too much time at wastewater treatment works with piles of stinky wet wipes, cotton bud sticks, and period products. And when you're faced with literally mountains, giant, talking like 2-story house mountains that they've screened off from the water treatment works of wet wipes, period products, and cotton bud sticks. So obviously we tackled cotton bud sticks. We got those turned into cardboard. You still shouldn't flush them down the loo, but they're not as big a problem as they were. And then we were like, right, should we tackle wet wipes or shall we tackle period products? So we decided initially to tackle period products because we felt like there was such a huge gap in people's understanding of what they're made of, period products, of what they're made of, and B, why you shouldn't flush them down the toilet. So kind of like, and the whole education system around periods was very biased and monopolized by the big brands like Tampax and Always. And their period education in school was obviously heavily loaded towards pupils becoming brand loyal to these big brands. But they would teach you how to insert a tampon, and they show a girl cycling off on her bicycle, and that would be it. There was no talk of proper disposal and overall the environmental impact of your period. So we started plastic-free periods in 2017, which was really just a fun sort of, at that time you could create videos that could go viral because it was, the brand new world of Facebook still back in 2017, really. And yeah, it was brilliant. We started a really big conversation about reusable menstrual products, and by at that point you could go beyond a menstrual cup or a moon cup. There was started to be washable pads and washable period pants, and so we just kind of began that conversation online, and then we developed that into an education program, Rethink Periods, and that has now trained a phenomenal number of, I think, sort of over 150,000 students, and trained over 600 teachers and nurses that will carry on delivering Rethink Periods in schools. And also that addresses the sort of period taboos and stigma around sort of period language and making it more inclusive. And yeah, I think, for listeners that still aren't really aware of the amount of plastic in period products, the average pack of menstrual pads contains the same amount of plastic as 5 carrier bags. So it's a lot of hidden plastic. And in the UK, I mean, this statistic is now quite out of date, so I don't know how much things have changed, but it used to be that every day in the UK, we're flushing around 2.5 million tampons, 1.5 million pads, 1.7 million panty liners down the toilets every day. And that contributes to the sewers becoming blocked, and that contributes to more of the sewage spills that we see coming into our rivers and seas. So that the less sort of burden we can put on our sewers, the more we can put plastic period products products in the bin, the better. But there are alternatives as well. There's like plastic-free period products like with Natracare or Natracare and other brands like that who have developed disposables still that suit some people, like tampons and pads and panty liners that are plastic-free.
There's a lot to unpack there, so I just have a couple of follow-up questions for our listeners, starting with obviously the flushing the unflushables. There's clearly a huge issue with that. So aside from do not flush signs on packaging, how can we encourage people to stop using the toilet as a bin?
Well, I think the most important thing is to make sure there is a bin in the bathroom, because there has been a bit of a trend towards like decluttering your bathroom and like that bins in bathrooms, they're icky or whatever. So I think everyone, making sure you have got a bin in your bathroom, and I'd go as far as to say have two. So one for your recyclables and one for what's going into, your waste bin. And that's really important even for single men to still have a bin in their bathroom for potential daughters or girlfriends or, anyone visiting with a period. There's not enough in terms of the labeling. There is still confusion around, there's been a new brand of period products created called that are sort of said to be flushable, and they're like legally they're not. Physically, yes, you can flush it down the loop, but legally it's not actually sort of certified to go down the toilet. So there's a lot more work to do. But I think education in schools. So, right from the get-go, we know, when we start our period, that the toilet is not a bin and it's only pee, paper and poo that goes down the loo. So I think we are still fundraising for Rethink Periods so we can fund it into more schools. And I think, education is the main thing really. And then where possible, better labeling.
Great. So we spoke about plastic in periods. For our listeners, why should they care about plastic in their period products?
Well, I mean, the main thing is, environmentally, that sort of, when you look at the impact of period over the life cycle, the time that you're menstruating, it's a lot of waste. It's a huge volumes of waste. And we have this, some people, the majority of people have this mentality of there being an away and, it's fine, I'll flush it, or which obviously they shouldn't, or they'll put it in their bin and it gets taken away. But obviously, we have to deal with that waste somehow. So if we want to become more sort of holistic in our approach and more conscious of our impact on nature, then actually switching to reusables lightens the impact of our periods, but of our life on the planet, and we are able to live more sustainably in that way. So I think there's one side is like, because it feels good to sort of not generate loads of waste each time you're having a period. And, washable menstrual pads are like super easy, and washable period pants are like the ultimate lazy period sort of tools. So I think the technology has come on now in terms of, different things, different reusable products that suit different periods and different body types. And I think the secondary reason is that there is proven to be a lot of toxicity related to plastics and human health. And we're just starting to see more of that. But certainly around our more sort of intimate areas, our skin is thinner, it's more absorptive. So we're more prone to absorbing the toxic chemicals used in those period products. And brands like Natracare, who have the plastic-free alternatives, have got incredible resources on their website around the toxins in plastic period products. So there is a health issue there as well, and something for us to be aware of. At City to See, we ran a program, an online streaming event. Well, you might want to put a link to it in the footers of the podcast. That was a whole evening talking about the forever chemicals in period products.
Was this your It Could Be Toxic panel?
Yeah, I think that's it exactly. I was like, it's turning toxic, or it's something like that. Yeah.
I watched some of it. It was great listening to I think you had the Natracare founder on there as well. And you had a doctor, a holistic doctor, which is great too.
Indeed.
So I also watched a video on your website of 4 women freely talking about the different reusable period products available and how their experience was with each individual one. And it's honestly refreshing seeing women discuss, the different options and how they work with them. And I think there's room for more period products that can work for a variety of people, and wanted to find out what you thought about that as well.
I think that there's been a big shift in terms of new period products on the market and reusable period products. And, we've even seen like CBD tampons that can help with menstrual cramps. And so I think, relatively speaking, we've seen a lot of innovation in the last sort of 10 years, although there's a bit of a joke with those of us in the industry that if men had periods, we would have seen this kind of innovation like, a few hundred years ago. So it is really exciting to see some sort of, I'd say like people like Dame would be like a good brand innovator in the space who came up with a reusable tampon. And then they were like, hang on, we want to develop some really cool washable pads. And they have some good sort of reciprocal models, which we see in the more sort of progressive companies of like 1-for-1, where you buy one here and we help fund an education program somewhere else, though they're learning to make their own period products, or we're providing menstrual cups. But yeah, I think there's definitely room for more circularity, within the space. And, things like, I know I think in Scotland somewhere, maybe with Zero Waste Scotland, they were looking at sort of period waste collection as a sort of along with nappy collection, so that you could actually have a separate waste stream for collecting period products, which I think was really interesting.
How do you think that would work, the waste collection of period waste?
It's basically about kind of keeping it out of our toilet. So it's like actually then it would raise more awareness about this being a separate waste stream, because contaminated with blood, as in, and then could also go in with nappies. And so, yeah, keeping it out of landfill, keeping it out of our toilets. Where it goes and what they do with it, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, it probably goes for incineration, let's be fair. Let's be honest with that.
We spoke about your Rethink Periods campaign, and I was just curious on what's covered in a typical lesson plan.
It was PSH accredited. So we went through a number of different sort of lesson plans. We looked at the sort of myths and taboo around periods. We look at the biology around periods. And so the environmental impact is actually really, I think, only sort of one session out of 4. And then I think the last session is very much a sort of hands-on. We've got these lovely boxes full of different kinds of period products, so people can see what a moon cup or a menstrual cup looks like, what does a washable pad look like, and so full of statistics, but also full of practical things as well.
So are boys included in these classes? Do you think they should be if they're not?
100%. No, that it's a sort of gender inclusive program. It's been designed with gender inclusive language, so we tend to say people with periods, because obviously there are plenty of trans people, non-binary people with periods. So the whole program was designed around that. But I think, yeah, probably my favorite piece of feedback was when it was delivered at an all boys school. They really enjoyed it and they learned so much. And I think, it should be in all schools, not just sort of mixed schools or girls' schools.
That's great. What do you look for in ambassadors of your Rethink Period campaign, and how can they work with you?
Well, our ambassador program is really for anyone that is really passionate about the subject, that likes working with young people, and that wants to make a difference in the world. So we trained, I think at the time when we had funding for that particular program, we worked with the Women's Environmental Network, and we had some funding for the initial sort of rollout across, I think, about 60 schools. And for that, we trained a number of ambassadors. So yeah, basically people that are comfortable and excited to talk about the impact of our periods and are happy doing that with young people in the room.
Great. So I'm really curious about your philosophy on partnerships, what you look for in a specific collaboration, and what makes you say a hearty yes to a brand, an NGO or charity, and then how you manage that relationship going forward.
So being an NGO or charity ourselves, we would be looking to partner. Usually we have partnered with charities and NGOs, for example, on Rethink Periods and delivering, and we got collaborated and gone in on a funding bid together. In terms of partnerships, that's generally for us where we're looking for a financial exchange to fund our work. So usually a hearty yes is when it's a significant amount of money and from a company that passes our ethical screening policy. So, we've got those two factors involved. So who we would work with, is it greenwashing? Is there genuine sort of purpose alignment? So for us, we've had some fantastic partnerships over the years working with reusable bottle partners. So we had like a 6-year partnership with Chili's. which really helped supersize our refill campaign. And we're now working with Ocean Bottle, who are even more resonant in that for every ocean bottle you buy, they are able to prevent 1,000 pieces of ocean-bound plastic at source. For us, that's the kind of exciting partnership where it's like, yeah, we're doing the upstream solutions to plastic pollution in terms of getting people to switch to reusables and becoming aware of plastic pollution, using less plastic, and then Ocean Bottle, as well as having a tool to, have your reusable bottle, they're also stopping plastic from getting into the ocean. So that's like a nice alignment with partnerships. Working with Nature Care, for example, having a sponsor like that working with us on our plastic-free periods, it's so aligned, and that's a dream partnership. And then we've worked with bigger companies that perhaps are sort of less obvious, like we've worked with investment banks, and that's been really to feel like we can actually start to influence kind of outside of our echo chamber, outside of our audience, and really start sort of seeing if we can push investment in refill and reuse and sort of sell the story of reusable, refillable cities and the circular economy and what's needed at that level. For us to do that, we then have to kind of be in the room with these multinationals and the corporates that are making these sort of decisions.
Can we just talk about your ethical screening process? What's involved in that?
It was a collaborative piece initially. We worked through, what companies would we work with? What companies wouldn't we work with? So, for example, we're fighting plastic pollution. Would we do a partnership with Buxton Water or Evian, or Coca-Cola? So that's a really interesting point. And the time that we have considered working with Coca-Cola was when they were piloting reusable machines in universities. I don't think it went anywhere in the end. We certainly didn't end up working with them, but we were open to working with them in that particular way because it was about refill and reuse, and it was about their transition away from single-use plastic. That was an interesting point. And at that point, we'll then usually take it to the senior leadership team. So the head of partnerships will screen potential new partners with the ethical policy. And then if we feel like it's an interesting piece of work, for example, working with Unilever, one of the world's top plastic polluters, but also the work that they're doing in terms of transitioning to reuse is really interesting and innovative. So would we work with them within the reuse space? Absolutely, because that's what we are trying to facilitate. So I think that's sort of, it is on a case-by-case basis, but we do have a few general we can't do that.
I've listened to one of your songs, Daughter of Nature. I love it. What was your inspiration behind that? And how did you write the song yourself?
I did, as I mentioned earlier, actually City to Sea did start with the song. Before I knew it was going to be City to Sea, my first sort of what can I do about plastic pollution was actually a music video set to a sort of a song that I'd written, which wasn't about plastic pollution. That would have been a terrible song. But I felt like the music video could be about plastic pollution. So I did a crowdfunding campaign, and that was my first response to the plastics crisis, was actually an artistic response. And then I felt like, oh, actually, it didn't do that well. I don't know if it changed the world. So I'm going to do City to Sea, and we're going to run some really impactful campaigns. And now 10 years into that, I've sort of come back to my music and that creative part of me. So yeah, I'm a songwriter and I play guitar, and I'm in the very fortunate position of having got a record deal with a small label in London for my first album.
Are you originally from London?
No, I'm originally from the South Coast in Southampton.
I did want to ask that because I'd seen that you had a yoga studio in Southampton.
Third book, Do Good, Get Paid. I talk about this kind of coyote trail of a career because I never really knew, what I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. And actually it took me, I think, until my late 30s to sort of land on City to Sea. And actually, me sticking at something for 10 years is absolutely unheard of. My career's had a lot of different iterations, and I was kind of weaving my way. And I think City to Sea really brought those skills together, the sort of television presenting, the sales element, and also the environmental aspect. But what it doesn't have for me is the sort of spiritual aspect, which, as you alluded, I was a yoga teacher, and I feel like my music perhaps is a way of bringing that through, bringing both a deep connection to nature and nature as a source of inspiration and creativity, and then expressing that in the world through music. So Daughter of Nature was the first song to be released from that album, which by the time your listeners are listening to this, the album will be very soon to be coming out. So yeah, I'm on Spotify and all the streaming platforms if people want to have a listen.
One last thing, just because this is of interest to me. Do you have theatre experience, like Stagecoach, nothing? Because you seem to be really good at it.
Thank you.
Well,
I
like 4
did.
accents also, like in 4 to 5 accents in some of your albatross and turtle videos. It was just so hilarious. It's really good.
Yes, for those listening, Temini did have a good deep rummage. And there's some fun stuff on there that goes way back. Yeah, so actually, when I was a child, I thought I wanted to be either a singer or an actor, and did a lot of acting. My mum thought I shouldn't grow up with a proper Southampton accent, so she sent me to like speech and drama school to sort of give me a more of a well-spoken accent. And then I have done some training as a fool, which was sort of, it's a bit like training as a clown, but it's
Yeah.
just a little more working with the unknown, working with the psyche, and it was a quite an intense 2-year training. And I think that gave me the complete freedom to then be confident on stage and to work with the audience and be aware of what the audience are bringing. And so, yeah, as a speaker, I love being a speaker because, yes, I get to sort of play with the audience. So I think those sort of skills have really helped. And I think anyone who's doing founder work really, or certainly people who are in like business development, who are out presenting their work and presenting their story, that kind of coaching and training, I think, is invaluable.
Thank you very much indeed. That's absolutely fascinating. I did want to just touch on the singing side of things as well, because I'm of the view that the protest song movement that exists within the folk genre, that kind of thing, has a really powerful way of cementing and bringing together multiple different audiences around a common cause. We've seen it with civil rights right the way through the Vietnam War, right the way through the latter parts and all the rest of it. There is a role within that now in the environmental stage. Is that an area of exploration that you think might fit your kind of dynamics in getting your message out to that wider audience as well?
Yeah, I feel like it's sort of where I'm starting from in a way now with my music, and my audience and my network are rooted in the environmental movement. But in a way, I feel like my music, maybe rather than tapping into the angst and the frustration, I think taps into the need to be restored and be held and feel safe. And there is an element, I think, of soothing, of what people have been saying to me is like, oh, I couldn't stop crying, or like I felt like my nervous system has just kind of been reset, or like, oh, my toddler just went into a trance and stopped crying, and every time I play it, so it feels like maybe there is something in it that I would hope, and I'm sensing from people's feedback is a sort of a place that activists can go for, a bit of a a bit of a rest, and some support. Although one of the songs on the album is called These Are the Times, and I did write that in response to hearing that 1 in 3 young people are experiencing climate anxiety. So I wrote These Are the Times. And when I saw the sort of division and the polarity that happened within COVID and within the sort of vaccine hesitant and those that were getting vaccinated, there was this huge divide. And I feel like These Are the Times kind of addresses whatever cause we feel moved to dedicate our energy and our time to, and what we want to show up and be of service to.
So what I got from it was, I think, just optimism. I think it was about looking forward as well. And I think that was really, I found that when I was listening to some of the lyrics and some of what you're doing, I found it was not rooted in, like you say, anxiety. It was rooted in where do we go from here kind of attitude. And I think that to me sort of kind of lived through it. And I think that's just for me, that's a really powerful message that we shouldn't be rooted in the negatives. We should always be thinking about being supremely optimistic about the future, even as hard as it is in today's world. So I think that sort of message comes through.
Thank you. Yeah. And I feel, there is definitely a place for despair and grief and rage. And because that's what made me start City to See, was this incredible despair of like what's happening to the albatross, and really feeling that grief and really allowing that to express through me. But I didn't stay stuck in it, because that quite quickly moved into, then it was like rage, like how the hell is this allowed? And that real sort of that injustice, and that then being like the fire that then started my campaign work, or the art behind it. But yeah, ultimately I think what I'm hearing from your experience of listening to my music is it is deeply rooted in nature. And I think My understanding, my experience of being in nature isn't that it's raging or it's cross or anything like that, or despair. It just is a deep, loving reciprocity and a being that's there and available for all of us. So if even a fraction of that comes through the music, then I'm happy.
Well, it did for us anyway. So just 2 or 3 very, very quick questions. Last book you read?
Oh, the last book I read was Circe, about the witch goddess daughter of Helios. So it's like a Greek mythology fiction. It was brilliant.
Excellent. Last film box set, did you ever get a chance to watch?
Currently watching The Empress on Netflix and really enjoying that. I think a story of like patriarchy and femininity and
Very on brand.
yeah, I'm really enjoying that.
And one final question, what would be your ideal meal on your birthday?
Controversial, oysters and champagne.
Oh, lovely. Very nice too. We've got a natural supply of oysters around Colchester with the Mersey oysters. So there you go.
I mean, my interest in protecting the rivers and the seas is obviously has some ulterior motive as well, because I want our sustainable seafood to be healthy.
Thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you, Temini, for those questions. I really did enjoy listening to all of that. Could have listened for another 50 or 5 minutes or whatever, but thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Temini, and thanks, James.
Take good care. Speak soon. Bye-bye.
So there we have it. Another episode of the Interwoven podcast is complete, and there will of course be all of the links to Natalie's work in the show description. Just a quick mention, if you want to have a community that supports you and a place to learn and develop as a business owner, then simply join our free community by visiting wearetheweave.co.uk. If you're ready, you could then be part of the 1% Club, where you can find your audience, bring about the conversation, and get yourself on this very podcast, and you too can be the voice of the North Essex startup community. I've been Adam Roxby, the Director of Communications, and I look forward to seeing you in the community.